We all heard about the HR scandal of the year last week. Yes, I'm calling it of the year. A CEO and a CPO of the same company go to a Coldplay concert together. And guess what? They're caught loved up on the big screen, having virtually what was a Titanic moment. This was a big reminder that workplace relationships happen, and a lot of times they're unavoidable. But the real question is, are you actually prepared in your workplace if this comes up? Or have you even given it much thought? If you want to know the legalities of when romance sparks in your workplace and what to do, then this episode is just for you. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lawlands. My name is Sanam and thank you so much for tuning in to the Employment Law Done Right podcast. Well, what a saucy, salacious, scandalous week we had for HR last week. Obviously, if you live anywhere on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, whatever mode of social media you want to choose, there was so much out there about this particular story, so much backlash that came to HR about the fact that this is why no one trusts HR. But what I actually wanted to talk about and what I took out of it was that this is an unfortunate situation. If you go and see the footage, then it's on a big screen. You've got Coldplay kind of calling them out, saying it's either that they're shy or it's affair. Unfortunately, it's the latter. And that is what I took from this, was that workplace relationships can happen and they can be complicated. And it's about how you navigate those, especially in the New Zealand landscape. So I thought, why not cut through all of this noise around HR being bad and all of that, and let me give you something that's actually practical here. So yes, saucy scandal. Unfortunately, it comes with all of these extra bits and pieces, which a workplace relationship can come with when you're dealing with something in your own workplace. You've got a situation where the CEO was already married, had kids, and this is an extramarital affair that's happening. There is a lot of difficulty when you're navigating these kinds of situations. Unfortunately, this was just on a much larger scale and a lot more viral. Let's talk about what a workplace romance is, or a workplace relationship. You know what I'm talking about. You're casually in the kitchen. There's a cheeky smile given to somebody across the room. All of a sudden, you've got two people magically always on lunch together. They always manage to step out together. And you're wondering, where did they go? Because they would normally hang around with you during lunch. All of those things. They can be romantic. Sometimes they go a little bit beyond that and they become physical relationships. And a lot of times they're quite harmless. But sometimes they become front page news, like we saw. And other times they become very complex and sometimes toxic for the workplace. So what we know is that they're not illegal, but they can create risk if you don't have the right processes and systems in place. So the big question that you would have is, can employers actually ban these workplace relationships? Because we hear about it all the time in the US, right? We hear about the fact that you're not allowed to have relationships with anyone at work, and if we find out and HR finds out, that's it, we're going to fire you. I mean, how many movies have we seen where there's a love affair happening in the workplace? One person out of the couple gets pulled into the office room with HR, and all of a sudden they've got a box that they're carrying out with all of their stationery, their plants and everything, while one of them stays back in the workplace and is just crying and upset and thinking, should I just resign myself? A lot of drama. But before we get into it, I just wanted to say, make sure that you're subscribed to Lawlands, that you're following the podcast, because I am churning these out every week, and I hope that these are interesting and engaging. Share them around with your friends, your family, anyone that owns a business. We are trying to revolutionize employment law here and make it something that you can actually tune into and somewhat enjoy, because I know it's still compliance, so I'm not that naive, everyone. And let's get back into it. So, can employers actually ban relationships at work? Yes, to a certain extent in New Zealand. What we're talking about here is that employers can actually require employees to disclose romantic relationships, especially if there is a reporting line issue. So let's say you've got a conflict of interest that comes up. You can prohibit relationships in certain circumstances where one person might have authority over the other person. So if we look at a CEO, CPO kind of situation, or even just a normal workplace, let's say you've got somebody that's lower level and their direct report or the direct manager is the person that is in a relationship with them, then you can see that there's a power imbalance there. And also, employers can 100% set expectations around how people need to behave in the workplace in terms of professional behavior. And under health and safety legislation, employers do have an obligation to take reasonable steps to eliminate or minimize risks, which could include interpersonal conflict or emotional distraction that could affect safety sensitive roles or affect health and safety in the workplace. And that is a very, very critical component of your arguments here, is that how does this actually impact the safety of other people in the workplace in general? And if you can build that case, then that's usually where employers can set those boundaries and parameters. How would you do this, and how would this kind of be done? Obviously, you're not going around saying, hey, are you two together? You better separate. No one's doing that. But instead, what you would be doing is things like having policies or a code of conduct in place. I've spoken about it before, having an employee handbook. That could be where you might want to detail all of this. But usually you would have policies or things in place where you would have some wording that says employees are required to confidentially notify HR if they enter into any romantic or sexual relationships with another employee where a reporting line, supervisory relationship, or conflict of interest exists. Because a lot of employment agreements already mention conflicts of interest, you could really branch off of that and use that as leverage to add something like that into your policies. But you can see the wording is specifically around conflicts, reporting lines, supervisory issues, that kind of scenario. It's really important to understand that you would not be banning a relationship in its entirety. It's about giving the employer a chance to manage risks like bias or favoritism or breach of duty. So the fact that the senior employee might have a particular duty to their junior staff. And it also supports a fairness in performance reviews and promotion processes, right? The last thing that you want is for somebody to turn around and say, well, they got the job because they were sleeping with the boss. I mean, we've heard it. It's been done and dusted time and time again. You don't want to hear it in your workplace. And it's always important to really look at it, like I've already said, around managing power imbalances. Really understand, especially when we're looking at the New Zealand context, there are so many things that can come up from arguments around bias. The fact that you can have coercion, sexual harassment, or even unjustified disadvantage claims. What is a conflict of interest so that you understand it as well? Like I said, your employment agreements that you've sent out to your employees might actually have this in there. But if not, usually what a conflict of interest is, or a perceived conflict, is a situation where there might be multiple employees or a particular employee that has actually noticed or perceived the situation to feel like there's a conflict of interest. Whether or not there is actually one, this is their perception. Now, conflict of interest would really genuinely be that there is a conflict. You can tell that if you've got somebody that is a head of sales and they have a romantic relationship with somebody that is an account executive and works directly under them, all of a sudden, if they're smashing their sales and doing all of their KPIs and 500% to target, it gets a bit suspicious. And then that's when you can really see that there is a conflict. When it's perceived, just keep in mind an example would be a manager in a workplace relationship might be perceived to provide favorable treatment to an employee that they are in a relationship with. So other people are noticing it. And just keep in mind that these can't be blanket bans. You need to make sure you are not getting into the territory of discrimination. And the reason why you can't do a blanket ban is because under the Human Rights Act, there is a prohibited grounds to discriminate, and that is to do with family status, which includes being married or being in a civil union or a de facto relationship with another person. And the legislation does have exceptions, like reporting relationships between people or where there is a risk of collusion or to the detriment of the employer. But again, that is usually the exception. The exception is what you are building into your policy. There is no rule around bans across the board because of the discrimination angle that they can go down if the employee chose to raise a human rights claim. I would say don't get into that discriminatory territory. Try to focus on behavior, not the relationship itself, and also conflicts of interest and issues that can come up in the workplace. That leads me to the next point, which is when could a relationship actually lead to disciplinary action? Let's say that you believe that there's a breach, you want to start a disciplinary process. Well, we know that to do a disciplinary process, one of the key requirements is substantive justification. You need a good reason. And usually in these scenarios, where that would stem from would be that the relationship is actually breaching very clear and detailed workplace policy. So like I said, having those sentences and lines in there around what a breach would look like, what conflict of interest means, so that if you are in this scenario scenario and you don't report it, then we may take disciplinary action. Also make sure that your policies actually say what will be the outcome. So don't just leave it up to chance or for interpretation for them to know what would happen if things go south. Another area that could lead to you kicking off a disciplinary process is around favoritism, or maybe that, like I said, there's a perceived conflict of interest or perceived bias towards this particular person that they're in a relationship with, or it could even be that conduct becomes inappropriate. You want to make sure that everyone understands what is appropriate and inappropriate conduct, what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior in terms of approaching, talking to people, how they would have those conversations, and that's usually where your sexual harassment policy is useful. Again, not about the romance that's the problem. So it's not about the fact that you've got two star-crossed lovers in love. It's about the ripple effects on performance, safety, and the team actually being cohesive and not feeling like there's any bias towards them. And I would say always stay objective. Handle all relationships the same. We do not want you to get an unjustified disadvantage claim or anything like that. So make sure that you are staying objective and you handle everything consistently. It has to be the same. And if you feel like people are not understanding, for those larger employers out there, I know it's a bit harder for the smaller ones, but if you're in a HR team and you feel like, look, things got really out of hand at the last Christmas party, or maybe you've got a few relationships underway in the workplace and you're a little bit concerned being in HR, or maybe you just want to get this area upskilled, then offering training on appropriate conduct, workplace boundaries, and how to act in a professional manner. And always make sure that you are clearly laying out what conduct is not okay when it comes to power imbalance relationships and things like that. And funnily enough, this year actually, we got a very, very interesting case that related to a paramedic who was romantically involved with one of their colleagues. And it's a case from this year. Actually, a lot of news outlets were quick to say, oh, the employer messed up this one. But I don't do that here at Lawlands. I actually take the case, break it down and have a look at it. And funnily enough, even though the employer had to pay compensation, the ERA said this is 100% a conflict and I can 100% see why you made the moves happen. This is a great case to show you exactly where you can do the right thing and then take it that one step above this particular employer and not have to worry about paying compensation if by chance you get a personal grievance over a scenario like this. The question is, what happened in the workplace that actually made them say that this type of relationship was not okay? And again, it's nothing to do with the relationship itself. It's to do with the safety behind things. So there was no blanket ban, but they did know that these relationships had happened in the past. The employee actually preemptively went to the employer and said that I'm in a romantic relationship with such and such person. The senior people in the room considered the impact of the relationship. So they took the context of the fact that they are doing emergency ambulance work, they're AMBOs, and what does that actually mean in a scenario when you're dealing with life or death. They looked at their health and safety manuals. They also looked at New Zealand's ambulance sector standards as well, which focuses on health and safety. They conducted a proper risk assessment here. Unfortunately, this wasn't a documented risk assessment. This was something where they had evidence that they had called and done these different things, but it just wasn't well documented. So that is my point number one. Make sure that as you're listening to this, you're keeping in mind that documentation is key. You can absolutely show you're working, just like when you're doing math. You can show how you got to the result or the answer that you had. And in this particular case, they identified that having two people in a romantic relationship working in a very high stress emergency team could actually impact safety, performance, communication, and decision making under pressure. They also had the context of previous relationships where things had gone awry in the workplace, specifically when it came to communication and decision making. But despite them dealing with this in the past, the senior members of the team actually took the time to do that risk assessment. So like I said, nothing was formally documented, but the decision making included internal discussions, reference to policies, and even weighing up specific tasks and risks in the particular roles that they were in. And in this case, what was different is that they had two people that were both operational paramedics. They worked together on the same emergency ambulance, so they were responding to life or death incidents at the same time. Oh my goodness. I can't even imagine being in an ambulance, going to a scene which is life and death with my partner. We would probably get into an argument over how the person needs to be rolled over to be put onto the stretcher. We would probably argue about what medicine to administer. I wouldn't be surprised if we came out of that getting a divorce before we've even been married. So I completely understand where the concern lies. But they did their risk assessment and the management decision was to separate the pair operationally, and they reassigned one partner to a different station. It was genuinely a need to manage safety risks. The roster change was really not treated and framed as a punishment. It was presented as a risk control measure, and that is what the employee was told. That is what was written in all of the information that they had supplied. What led to the ERA saying that the employee needed to be given compensation was the fact that while the initial roster change was justified, there was a breach of good faith and consultation. And this is where a lot of cases fall short. I see it all the time and it's still happening, and this is a prime example. There was a high chance that this employer could have walked away from this situation if they documented everything and if they made sure mostly that they followed the consultative requirements under the good faith obligations that you have as an employer. So what does that mean? What does that look like? In this particular scenario, the ERA found that the employer didn't meaningfully consider the employee's concerns and proposals before finalizing the new roster. So the decision actually felt predetermined. And even though there was appearances of consultation, they went to the employee, they tried to have a discussion and said, look, this is what we're doing. It's risk-based and that's why we're doing it. It's not enough because the employer made a decision before looking at what the employee had to say, giving all the information to the employee, and then walking away from that. Because of that particular reason, the ERA said, look, the fault is not in the substance of the risk assessment, but it is definitely an issue of the process that you followed. And because of that, I feel like to a certain extent, yes, the employee's dignity was actually undermined and it has impacted them. And because of that, we believe that you need to pay them $10,000 for hurt and humiliation. So in that particular scenario, the employee walked away. But like I said, flip it on its head, have a look at the other side, because it's great that the Employment Relations Authority called that out. I appreciate that. Couple of tips from me before I wrap this all up. Focus on expectations around behavior, not the relationship itself. If you are worried about these things coming up, maybe you're in a larger corporation as well, proactive training can reduce a lot of risk when it comes to awkward situations. You know, that weird tension that fills the room when you've got two people that were dating at work and now they're not anymore. And you don't want it to turn into formal complaints either. So communication with the wider teams is always important. Make sure we've learned from that case. Document your decision making. Make sure it's objective and it's very specific to the risks and the facts and the breaches of the actual policies that you've got. And make sure that you link everything back to a legitimate business or operational need, and it is not specific to any biases or anything like that. Now, romance in the workplace is not a crime. People fall in love all the time, but ignoring the risks can be a problem. So that is it from me, everyone. If you are liking these episodes, then please make sure that you follow the Law Lens podcast. I love putting these episodes out for you. And if you've got any questions or any concerns, then send them my way. Email is down in the show notes, and I hope you have a lovely day, night, evening, morning, whatever it may be. And I'll catch you in the next one, everyone.